Hi, Soeb.
I,
Welcome to the very first session of Brands Decoded. I'm super excited to have you guys here with us today. I think pretty much everyone watching knows a lot about the two of you, so I'm not going to get into that. But I think what a lot of people don't know about is how well you guys know each other and the fact that you go way back, like 11 years or so now, and you started your very first startup together.
yeah, I mean, shit, I'm revealing how old I am. Neil looks it, I don't look it. So, um,
Oh, very funny, sir. Very funny.
but yeah, 11, 12 years now at least.
Yeah.
Since college.
So, Wade, why don't you take over and tell us a little bit more about that backstory before you dive into the story of Casper?
Sure. Will do. Thank you so much, Asta. And thanks, Neil. Thanks for taking all the time. Good morning.
Good morning. Nice to be here. Nice to be with all of you.
Super. Well, for everyone in the audience, as Asta was alluding to, Neil and I, we go way back, like he said, about 11, 12 years when we were in college. Incidentally, we started our first company together, which we were just joking about this backstage. Neil's first startup was India focused, which is kind of hilarious if you think about just overall trajectory. Yeah, I mean, Neil, if you want to share how we met, because it was at your backyard.
Well, it was kind of a crazy story. So we were bored in college. I was at Brown, and Sohaib was at RISD, and I think we were just looking for something to do. So we decided one day, let's start a nonprofit that's going to help people, because we were pretty socially conscious, and so we decided, okay, most of us, our families are from India. Why don't we try to focus on something that's India related? So we decided that we wanted to start something in the water space. And so the more we dug into it, we realized that there was this problem around the world, especially obviously in India, but in the slums, getting access to clean water was very difficult because most of the NGOs in the world were really focused on the rural water problem. How are we getting access to water by digging wells? But actually, clean water in urban areas is also a big problem because of the piping and infrastructure and whatnot. So we were sitting in our backyard one day talking, shooting the shit about different ideas, and in strolled Sohaib with one of our mutual friends. I don't remember who it was. Who was it?
I think it was Sarkader.
Just walked in, and I was like, and this is like a big moment for me because I used to think Sohaib was so cool, because RISD students were top of the hierarchy when it came to coolness.
What was being the main operative word there?
Yeah, of course was. And since that day we've been very good friends. We've worked on many different adventures together around the world, both in India and the US and whatnot. So happy to be here.
Thank you for sharing our very intimate story. Just changing gears, and I think everyone is here for Casper and to learn more about you guys. I've been fortunate enough to have literally a front row seat as you and Luke gave everyone who started building Casper. But for everyone else out there, I think it'd be great to hear from you. Where did the idea come from? I remember a phone call in, I think, 2013 when you said you want to start putting mattresses in a box and start selling them. And I was like, well, this sounds more like a legit business than anything we've thought of before. So, okay. But so why don't you share with everyone where did the idea come from? Why mattresses, particularly with the context of the US market? And
Yeah. So we'll start with where the idea came from, and then we could talk about the market and the dynamics and what creates an interesting place to start. So I think, like most good ideas, it was kind of an accident. It's not like I, woke up saying one day I want to be a mattress person, although there's nothing wrong with that. I was in medical school, had dropped out. My dad's actually a sleep doctor, as you know. And I was sitting in a co-working space in New York working on a totally different business idea, how to connect influencers with, commerce opportunities to sell things on their websites or platforms. And it wasn't really going that well. And I was sitting next to a guy in this co-working space who was telling me about how he used to sell mattresses online from his dorm room when he was in college. Now, like, what's crazy is when I brought that up, I was like, that seems like such a stupid idea. Like, why would anybody sell mattresses online? Like, don't you have to try it to buy it? And like, it doesn't even seem like a very sexy category to be working on. But the more I dig into it, it's like sometimes, different pieces of it come together and we realize, okay, it's not really about mattresses, but mattresses are interesting as a category, as a starting point, because experience in the United States was so terrible. Like, you'd have to go to a mattress store. There's all these like comical videos of like, 100 mattresses that are out. There's some guy in an oversized suit who's, looking over you, and they're trying to sell you something that's thousands of dollars. And the experience was not great. And we'd asked a bunch of people like, hey, what kind of mattress do you sleep on? Nobody can remember, right? So there were no brands in the space, with the exception of maybe Tempur-Pedic at the very, very high end. And then we had seen, like, because you're never doing this on your own, that Warby Parker and Harry's and some of the original Bonobos, some of the original direct-to-consumer brands have been very successful. And so we said, okay, like, how come nobody's doing this in the sleep and mattress space? So we started working on the idea, and when it really kind of started coming to us was when, and again, it's like just total luck. One of my medical school classmates, her boyfriend had worked at IDEO for 10 years. Mm-hmm. And so I called up Jeff and said, hey, do you know anything about the mattress industry and mattresses? Because we have this idea to, go direct to consumer, launch a brand that really has amazing customer service and a better product, but we don't know anything about how to actually design a product, which is like kind of the problem. So it turned out that Jeff knew a lot about how to do product design. He went to Stanford and Princeton and worked at IDEO for 10 years. And so we teamed up. And I think the basis of the business really was two things: a really interesting market opportunity where there's an oligopoly. So two main manufacturers, Serta Simmons Bedding and Tempur Sealy Bedding, control like 90% of the market. So what that means, though, and why it's an interesting business opportunity, was because they were stuck in a really hard place, because almost all of their business they would sell through retailers and distributors, right? So they didn't have a very big direct business. So now when we launched, they actually couldn't really launch a big direct business and copy us, because the second they started going direct, their main retail partners would get really pissed at them and say, what the hell are you doing? Why are you cutting us out? So it actually created this perfect storm environment where, we basically went unnoticed for the first few $100 million in revenue that we did, because they either didn't really see us because they were too busy doing their own thing, or they just like couldn't do that much about it. And I think the last piece of the story, which is, I think is just like the importance of working with great people. Like my co-founders, I just tremendously enjoyed like the experience of working with them. We were friends. And so it made it all the more fun starting something together.
Cool. Again, I want to go back to that time. And
yeah.
I want to ask the same question from two different sort of angles. One is, let's just talk about customers. How did you go about convincing, say, the first 100 people to buy a mattress in a box online? Because like you said, the American psyche back then, a mattress is a touch and feel category. Furniture is notoriously, or at least in a lot of markets, is still notoriously bad on e-commerce. So how did you go about convincing those first 100 customers to try Casper?
So it kind of started with, what's the value proposition to the customer, right? Casper, the original value proposition was a better product at a much cheaper price, amazing support, and the fact that at the beginning it was 40 days that you could have to return it, no issues asked. And the proposition was, why would you go into a mattress store and try something for 5 minutes? That makes no sense. You should actually try it in your home, try it for 30, 40 days, and then if you don't like it, we'll happily take it back. Now, the insight that I think many people didn't realize that we had figured out was, in our customer research, when we had talked to people and we had started giving people beds to sleep on, we'd actually been able to design a bed that fits the curve that the majority of people will like, because it was a combination of foam and latex and whatnot. And so what it meant was that by the time it's in your home, we knew that not that many people are going to return it, because it's actually like, it's an amazing product. And most people adjust to these things over a certain amount of time. So we were pretty confident that we could have a much more aligned business model where you could try it in your own home, we could take it back, and we had to do everything we could to reduce the barriers to friction around ordering, right? So return policy was one of them. We had a showroom in New York where you could actually come and try it in our office and talk to us. And then it was our own involvement. Like there was a chat box that said chat with the founders. And so, everybody who landed on our website could chat with one of us. The phone lines went to us. It was just like a Google Voice number that would ring all 5 of us. And so I think a lot of the first 100 customers just were like these amazing early adopters who discovered us because of PR or somewhere else, but they had a very personal interaction with the company. Like we dropped off most of the first mattresses ourselves into their homes so we could see, oh, this is what it's like. By the way, if you have a problem, you can call me directly. And we still have some of those customers that call us today, when they have something that they need. So I think it was really about, that personal connection.
That's an interesting question. I'm going to the second half of this conversation, I really want to talk about scale. So it'd be interesting to come back to this question and ask you how do you actually scale this culturally, right? Like we'll come back to that later. But the second half of the question was, again, absurd idea, mattress in a box. How did you sell it to investors?
Nobody wanted to invest in it, truly. I'm sure for all of you that are working on, ideas, it was so difficult. I mean, first of all, like just the reaction like you guys and my friends had, which was like, you're dropping out of medical school to sell mattresses on the internet. Like that seems like the stupidest idea ever. and so it was like, it wasn't really a great starting place already to come from. And at that time, there was a lot of skepticism about the business model, like in terms of, is there really going to be a repeat purchase? Can you make this work? It's a high AOV item that you're going to sell one time, which means that you have to be profitable in the first purchase if you don't have other things that you're going to sell people. Are there actually network effects in this business? And the biggest hurdle was just like, I think a lot of people couldn't conceptualize the idea that people were going to buy this product category online. And I think, like everything, right? Tesla proved it wrong, that you can go and buy a $30,000 car online without ever having seen it. And so that was the original challenge. And what happened is we probably pitched 50, 60 different investors, and we didn't know most of these people. So it was always like, hey, do we have a friend who happens to know somebody? We pitch that person. They're like, oh, well, you should go talk to this person. So it's this very crazy network that you just have to kind of work your way through. Until one day, and this is again, total happen chance, we meet this guy, Ben Lear from Lear Hippo Ventures. And we pitched to his team, and his team is like, I don't know about this. But they go and bring it up to him in the partner meeting, and he's like, I love that idea, and I've been wanting to incubate a company that does this exactly. And so by total twist of fate, we ended up jamming with somebody who loved the idea, and he wrote us our first check to lead our round. And even then it was really difficult, because even once we had, we were raising like $1.5 million, and we got 400,000 of it. And then the next million was just still really difficult piece by piece. It took us another 3 or 4 months. And this is, I'm sure you guys have gone through the similar experience where it's really hard when you're in that conceptualization phase, because you don't have enough money to really create the product and the brand, right? That you need to show people. But then you also can't create it because you don't have enough money. And then people don't want to invest. It's like this whole circle of just like, how do I get out of this problem? And like, the way to get out of it is to kind of get enough people to believe that you can do it, and then start building it. So then we started building out the brand and the product. And then as we were making progress, that got more people into the round, because they were like, oh, wow, in just 2 months, you made all this progress. So I'm sure it's just as frustrating today, but I think it's just part of the journey.
Yeah. Also, like, and we've talked about this a lot, right? Like, this is an inherent problem with designing and shipping physical products, right? Like the R&D cycles, the prototyping cycles. I mean, it is tougher. It is tougher for a D2C brand than a SaaS company, right? So that's you sort of brought up something earlier about you were sort of under the radar for vis-a-vis your competitors for the first 100 million, which is a huge number. It's surprising that they really hadn't even caught up. But just to dial it back, I'd be curious, what was the process like to even get to a first 100 million? How long did it take you? And how do you think, because we've talked about the inception phase, like as you were sort of thinking about early prototype, getting some early validation for 100 customers, but the nature of the business changes for anything, specifically for what you guys do, between sort of the first 0 to 1 million, 1 to 10 million, 10 to 100 million. So it would be, you've seen it all. So I'd be very curious to organizationally in a business, what are the differences at each one of those levels for a D2C brand?
Yeah. What I would say is, for us, it happened in a very compressed timeline, and so there was a few things that are really important to pay attention to, that are really hard. Which is, at the beginning, you're just trying to get something out the door, right? So you haven't built any processes or systems or anything, right? So we didn't even have a warehouse to ship out our products. Like, we were literally just, we would pay a truck to pick up the products from our factory. They would bring them to our office in Manhattan, which was a second floor apartment. We personally would take them off the truck and put them in the office. And then we had a label printer with UPS labels, and we would print and send them out. Because we thought, okay, like, how many are we going to sell? Like maybe 100 in the first 6 months or something. And because we had struck a nerve and we just happened to be very lucky that there was a lot of demand for the product, all of our systems were breaking all the time, because now it was like, okay, in the first day we sold 100. So we did like 100,000. In our first month, we did $1 million in sales, which, now to be fair, like, that's a lot, but when you're selling $1,000 product, like, we sold 1,000 of them, right? So it was relative scale. We didn't have to sell that many products, but when you have to think about, we had no way of figuring out, how do I support 1,000 people? We had phone calls coming in, and we had, all the time, 24/7, people's beds were gone and broken and lost and whatnot. And so it was a lot of like recruiting an army of people to help us. And it was our friends at the beginning most of the time, right? Like Michael Kim and, all these people that we just called in and then say, hey, can you please just come help us at night? Like, we have to do, and then you get sometimes creative solutions. So we were like, a lot of our beds were, this is kind of a funny story. So a lot of our beds were delayed oftentimes. And so we would write handwritten notes in every single box saying, thank you for being a customer. We'd oftentimes include a book with it. Now, like, by the time we got to like 10,000 orders, we're like, dude, this is like every night. Nobody could leave the office if you didn't write like 50 handwritten notes. And people were getting so tired of this, because like we were trying to write thousands of these handwritten notes a week. So we're like, okay, there has to be a better way to do this. So I found one of my friends who's an entrepreneur in India, and he had created a service that could write these like robotically written handwritten notes. And so this allowed us to scale our experience, because a human could basically still write, like, they would copy your own handwriting and then figure out, how to get a robot to write it, which then enabled us to scale this operation to be a lot more personal to a lot more people. So sometimes it just forces you into these like weird creative
situations. If I remember correctly, you were an angel investor in that company as well.
I was, because I loved it so much. Yeah. I was like, this is a brilliant idea I've ever seen. And so, sometimes there's a creativity involved. What I'd say is also, like, truthfully, the hardest part is around yourself, your psyche, and your management. Like, how, like, the human, like, think about how long it takes us to change as people, right? Mm-hmm. When we think about whether you have a leadership coach or you're just working on self-growth, and in a company timeline, especially nowadays, once you raise VC money and you grow really fast, the change that's required of you is so crazy on such a fast pace. And it's really hard to keep up with that sometimes. Like, human beings were not meant to learn how to go from managing 5 people to 50 people to 100 people to 500 people within like, a few years, because it's a very different way of operating and of thinking and whatnot. And so that's where we spend most of our time, and, we can happy to dig into it. But, I think that's the hardest part, is just like, how are you managing yourself, and can you surround yourself with the right people who can help you work through that?
Yeah. Well, again, I'm going to circle back to that first question that I had, and specifically around customer experience, because that's what you were talking about, right? Being, picking up the phone at 12 a.m., writing these notes. I think I learned the term customer experience from you guys. I knew what user experience was, but I had no idea what this whole customer experience thing was. And I think that's one thing which most people forget that you guys did right, and you invested a lot into it, right? Customer success and customer experience. How do you scale that specifically? I mean, that's something which seems like the hardest to scale in certain ways.
It's really about creating a culture of it, because all that matters, like when you do it yourself, it's easy because it's your company and you're motivated to want to do it, right? You want to understand what's happening with the customers, and also like you have no choice, because if you have nobody that works with you at the beginning, it's like you have to deal with all the problems.
Yeah.
Then the question is, as you start hiring people, how do you get those people to really care about delivering an amazing experience? And so there's a few things that matter here. One is, are you bringing on the right people? And so what's the culture of your team look like? And at the beginning, what was very important was we would find people who would work in hotels, for example, right? Like who worked at the Four Seasons, or who came from really amazing hospitality experiences, because we wanted people who were very empathetic to the customer, and maybe this is their way of getting into tech, right? And so we would find, it wasn't generally the traditional customer experience person, but the reason was almost all what somebody was doing at the beginning was like problem solving, right? It was like, well, I'm moving into this house and I get there tomorrow, but the door's not going to be open and my kid's only home from this hour to this hour and blah, blah, blah. Like, can you help me figure this out? And it's like a lot of somebody just having to pick up the phone and say, I understand your problem. I'm going to try to help you figure this out. And making sure that somebody is not just delivering you the answer of like, oh, that's not my problem, right? And I think the core philosophy was everything is our problem. If it's related to us, even if we messed up the delivery, or if UPS messed up the delivery and we didn't get you the bed in time, for a lot of people, we would even just say, okay, we're going to get you a hotel room for that night since we messed it up, because we knew that the downstream impacts of helping people with that experience would be amazing. And then the second thing was, how do we empower that team to make these decisions without us being involved? And that was a lot of just trial and error, right? We created a budget so that the team every week could spend down into a certain amount of a happiness budget, right? So it was like, okay, we just log in this, Google sheet how much money they spent on making customers happy. And it was just like, and then we'd do other things. Like we'd say, let's look at our best customers and just send them gifts every once in a while, right? Just like, and instead of that sitting within the marketing team, we really allowed the customer experience team to just own that. They were allowed to actually spend part of their day just thinking about how to make customers happy, rather than just dealing with the problems that are coming in. And I think that's what really helped people going for a while as well.
That's really interesting. This idea of happiness budget, I'm gonna steal that one, as I hope everyone else kind of does. But then secondly, making sure that that responsibility and that ownership lived with customer experience and not marketing is also kind of genius, right? Because otherwise marketing is just constantly, it's messaging. Whereas, the CX team is thinking about it in a very different way, thinking about it more from a relationship point of view.
Yeah. And it allowed each team member, this isn't a new idea. Where we borrow it from is when you have high AOV items, and if you were going to buy from, I don't know, a jewelry store, for example, right?
Yeah.
That person's motivated to keep you happy because they want to develop a long-term relationship and it's worth a lot to you. And so we had just borrowed things from different industries and realized, okay, like if that person, like most companies are these like monolith of, I have no idea who works at this company, right? If you think about like, if I'm interacting with like, some teleco company, I don't know who works there. But if you can make it seem like I have a point of contact within this company, this person is my person, and they can fix any problem for me, I'm going to be a lot more loyal because I've got my guy, right? I've got like, the person who can really help me with that.
That's really interesting though. I'd love to get your thoughts on how that works out as you scale from a cost point of view, because that's really counter to overall trends in tech, which is like, let's put a bot on it. Let's use some AI. Let's make it impersonal. You have tech cost saving and reduction, which is really about automation, and which leads to everything being impersonal. But then what you're talking about is almost sort of like I don't want to say a full white glove service, but a human touch. So, I mean, how do you balance that out as you sort of scale? Because I'm sure it can get expensive.
It can get very expensive. And I wish there was like a smarter way of looking at this. I think it depends on what phase of the business you're in. At the beginning, everything is about information collection and making your customers happy. And what I mean by that is you're trying to understand, is what I'm doing resonating with my customer or not? Mm-hmm. So it didn't make sense for us to outsource our customer experience team, because I said, we want them sitting next, like we had one big office and engineers sat next to customer experience people who sat next to designers, because I wanted the whole team thinking, every day you're going to hear customer service phone calls all day. You're going to hear them talking about it. And yes, it can get kind of annoying sometimes. But the brilliance is then the engineers would go and say, oh, wait, like I hear this person doing the same thing over and over again. Let me just write a script to go and fix that problem for you. And then boom, they, figured it out. So I think at the beginning, when you need that like hyper collaborative collective experience and you're still in problem solving mode, it makes sense to invest in that. As you think about scaling, then you start looking at technology and how technology can be a tool to differentiate your business. And I think we never really thought about it as how does technology save cost, although maybe we should have. We thought about it as, can technology make the experience for our customers better? And so I'll give you an example. 50% of our inquiries, I think something like this, right, are where is my order? So I don't know where it is, et cetera. So like, why would you have to call us up to get that information? That makes no sense. Like that's actually a bad customer experience for me. I have to do more work. So then we said, okay, let's go and build a bunch of technology to make it easy for somebody to figure out where their order is without having to contact us. Mm-hmm. Now, if they want to reach us, they can still do that. And this is before now. Like, the amazing thing about starting a company today, and we could talk about this, right, is that you can abstract away all of this stuff to other people. Back then, there was no really Shopify, Narvar, video chat tools that you can use. So we had to build a lot of this technology ourselves. Whereas now, I think you can abstract away a lot of this stuff and then have your people focus on what's the experience you want to deliver.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think we should definitely double click on that one, because I had a very specific question regarding that and Casper. But before we go into that, this is a question that a lot of my friends, I sort of crowdsourced a few questions. So a lot of my friends had one specific question, which has to do with Casper's iconic branding, your storytelling, your messaging, design. You guys are known for it, right? Like since day one, you guys have had such a strong identity and a very different identity, which, as you created the category, pretty much everyone out there, including startups in India and elsewhere, have sort of started copying that identity a bit, or at least learning from it. Let's just put it that way. Why was that important early on? And how have you ensured that you've remained distinct over time?
Yeah. Well, I think first, philosophically, it comes down to how do you think about a brand and what is a brand? And the thing I learned from one of my partners who's really talented at this was that a brand is not just your visual identity. I think there was a thought process at the time that brand is just your logo, your name, what your website might look like. But there's this whole age and era now of, I think, the Mad Men style brand returning, which is a brand is like the identity of a company, right? What do they stand for? What do I think about them? And what are all the inputs that I get from the world about who that company is, so that I form this idea of, do I like them? Do I trust them? And for us, Casper, we needed certain things for the brand to do, right? It's a very high purchase item. So it has to be trusted, because you're going to spend the most money with us other than maybe your cell phone, computer, or car. So, it has to deliver this idea of like, this is a company I like and I trust. Simplicity is an important part of it, because the purchasing experience was terrible. And so we had to say, okay, how do I convey that? And then cool factor, right? How do I make somebody proud to own this category item and talk about the fact, wow, I just bought a Casper, I'm so excited. Nobody in the history of the world had been, I'm just joking, I'm being a little facetious here, but like nobody had been excited to buy a mattress before, right? It was like, oh, I have to go to this stupid store and spend all this money on this thing that, like, I don't even want.
Yeah.
So once you align on that piece of it, then the question is, how do I execute on that through all this other stuff? So when you look at our logo, for example, right? I have it here somewhere, right? On the little, you can see, right? The little arc on the C that is like the little, funny thing, like it came from a very simple place, right? It was like, oh, we need something that looks distinctive. We need a little like logo mark that you could just put the C by itself. And then, maybe it'll allude to a bunch of things. Like it looks like an arched back. It's like kind of weird and quirky. Okay, cool. Like that, there was probably like an infinite amount of more thought that went into it, but when you reduce it down. But one of the important things for our brand was always this idea of zing. And zing is like the Casper X factor. It's that like 5 to 10% of quirkiness that we wanted to put in the brand. And that was like to show people that there are humans sitting on the other side, that like we understand your struggles and your differences. And it manifests itself in all kinds of funny ways. It was like the fact that if you called up our customer service hotline, if you pressed 3, we would read you a bedtime story. So literally, if somebody pressed 3, somebody on our customer service team would pick up and open up a book and read you a bedtime story. Okay. Or in our photo shoots, a lot of times we'd have pineapples or disco balls or like weird figurines sitting in the back. And the goal of it really was to figure out like, how are you creating these like little moments where somebody can understand who your brand is. But brand is also things like customer service philosophy, right? At the time, everybody was charging you to return a mattress. So if you went to a store, they'd charge you a $250 restocking fee instead of making it free. And so there was, and then there were like stunts and other things that you can do, right? So we wanted to become the brand that's known for having very clever marketing. So at South by Southwest every year, which is, a big tech festival, hotels are always extremely expensive and they're like, hundreds of dollars a night. So we took over the Standard Hotel or the Bunkhouse Hotel in Austin for that week and said, we're actually going to raffle off hotel rooms. So we're going to sell them for $30 or $40, super cheap. And you could book it same day and then they'll be fully tricked out Casper. So now that weekend there ended up being a storm. And so a bunch of people had to stay longer than expected and they had nowhere to sleep. And so in this moment, we became like one of the heroes of South by Southwest because all these people finally had a place to crash and we weren't going to price gouge them and charge them $1,000 a night. Yeah. So it's like little stuff like that where I think once you just understand how people think and how they work, you do those things, and the goal of those things is not just the people that are there, but the stories that are going to be told about it, whether it's through the media or the people that are there, or the photos and social media, that then creates this aura of a brand for people.
Got it. Again, just being mindful of time because I think we need to leave enough time for questions. I have 2 more questions. One is about what you alluded to earlier on how starting a D2C brand now versus when you guys started is very different, right? Like you keep saying engineering team, and I'm sure a lot of first-time founders over here, that's so foreign, like the whole concept of a D2C company having an engineering team. But what's different like 6 years ago and now? And if you had to start Casper today, what would you sort of do differently?
That's a great question. And I think what's amazing is there's never been a better time to be somebody creating products for the world, right? You can launch as one person, you can basically launch the whole company because you can use Shopify or one of the, e-commerce tools. You can use MailChimp, or there are many different, marketing tools that you can build into place that you can use to connect together. There's CRM lifecycle tools, the Klaviyo, whatnot. For chat, there was only one solution back then. Now there's many different ones that you can put into place. There's even tools that basically can turn your web app into a mobile app very easily. Yeah. And so what's amazing is we've seen this world of abstracting out all these different parts of your business. Now, there's 2 interesting things here. One is if you're building products, it's a really interesting time to think about what are the tools that e-commerce companies or DCC brands are going to want to use in the future that are going to make their lives easier. So that's like the shovel strategy, right? Of going after that space. And then there's this idea of like, now to your point, like I've seen brands grow to hundreds of millions of dollars with 1 engineer, maybe 2 engineers, right? Not 100 engineers and product managers like we needed to, over time, build out all this different infrastructure. I think the other thing is the way people are marketing is very different. And so there was a time period where Facebook and Instagram were very efficient. Today, what I'd say is you have to look in other places because the auction dynamics are near perfect. It's really hard to hijack them and get efficient dynamics in the traditional marketplaces because Casper is not just competing against Casper. Casper is competing against every single person who wants to sell me something in my Instagram feed, which is everything. That's like this company, that's book companies, that's pen companies. So like our whole feed is just ads from different startups. And so that actually makes it much more expensive to acquire customers. And so you have to think, can I build community offline? Do I want to have stores? Am I using social in a very different way through influencers? But I think that's another, big kind of difference from when we launched.
Or potentially focus really, really heavy on mid-funnel and conversion, right? I mean, more so than ever before.
Exactly. And then, to your point, because leads are so expensive to generate, whereas before, people were really focused on performance marketing and less on conversion rate optimization. Today, conversion rate optimization is more important than ever. And that's where we spend the majority of our time focused because leads are so expensive to acquire that the other way to reduce your cost per purchase is to get really good at that, right? So is that like making it really easy to talk to our sales or service team? Is that like making sure you're, like that capture and the hook to make sure that we can actually sell you something?
Yeah. Like you have them in the store, sell them something, right? Like traditionally, as you would sort of do this offline.
And that's what's crazy is like, it's all just coming full circle.
Yeah.
If you walked into a shop in Bombay or whatever, like they're not going to let you leave without trying to sell you something, right? Well, what's nuts is
they're going to order the tea and the samosas and you're going to sit down there for 20 minutes, right? And you will walk out with something. Yeah.
And you will walk out with something. And e-commerce stores could never do that before. Like you could visit for 2 seconds. They might have paid $10 for you to come and visit, but they had no tools to make sure that you stay and interact and learn.
So this is interesting. And I'm going to segue into something that you were keen to speak about as well, which is, COVID and how D2C brands, but I think specifically I'd be keen to hear about how Casper dealt with COVID because it comes back to this whole online, offline. You had stores, you have a lot of doors, some of them had to shut. I'm assuming some are still shut, but you did some really cool things. So what did you guys do? How did you guys sort of react to COVID, and what are some of the cool programs that you rolled out that have been successful?
Yeah. I mean, COVID was really hard. When we launched, when it happened, we went public in February, and then COVID happened a few weeks later in a meaningful way. We had opened up 65 stores this year, or in the last year or so, basically. So we had 500, 600 people that were working in our stores that we had to very quickly ramp down. Now, what's hard is when retail was such a big part of our business. And there's some interesting things we learned from retail that I think all of you can really maybe think about, which was the data from our retail stores was incredible. We had seen that people were spending 30, 40, 50% more money in our stores than they do online. They're staying for longer. They have higher NPS scores. Almost every metric you can think about was right. So in some ways, what happened is when we had to shut everything down, we said, oh my God, what are we going to do? How are we going to pick up this part of the business? So what we started doing is we started testing into video. And that was a really important thing for us. Our team just kind of hacked together a bunch of stuff because we had some amazing product managers who said, what if we could actually do a few things? One, do video chats where maybe a customer service associate is at home. But two, what if you could be in the store? So we just have one associate who's in the store and you could video chat with them and they would take you on a shopping journey showing you everything that's going on in the store. And I was like kind of skeptical about this. Right? I was like, who's going to do these video chats? But what's crazy is it was one of the most successful programs we ever ran. And now we continue to do that because people are like, oh yeah, like I could just talk to somebody from the convenience of my home. Like I don't have to go into the store and I basically get, it's not just, what's also cool is that it changed the economics of the business because now a retail store cannot just serve the, traditionally, like how far are you going to drive to go to a retail store? Like 5, 10 miles, right? But now that retail store that's sitting in Austin, Texas can actually serve anybody in the United States. So your labor models become a lot more efficient because you can blend this idea of who's doing service and who's doing retail, and people are having a much better experience. Now, all of this stuff was hacked together, right? So I think we're gonna have to figure out long term, like how do you end up having like seamless solutions and stuff. But yeah, I think there's, that was probably one of the most interesting things that happened, was that the mode of interaction totally changed.
And what's interesting is coming back to something you shared earlier about just customer success and putting a face to the brand. I think that you were able to add that level of personalization online through video, and there was an actual human being that you were speaking to, as opposed to a chatbot or something else. So it brought back that whole idea of relationship building long term as well.
Exactly.
Cool. I have a ton of questions, but then I just got the organizers just messaged me. There's a whole host of questions from the audience. So I'm gonna ask you a few. Let me pick. I have a few of them. I'm gonna see which one seems interesting.
Thank you for sending questions.
Yeah. Some of these are very very technical, Neil. I don't know if I should ask you these.
That's fine. We can bang through them. Do you want?
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Let's just start from the top. What are the best practices to grow organically when you're bootstrapped? Great question. Versus spending on customer acquisition online.
Yeah, great question. So I'll give you a few examples. For one, when you think about your first 100 customers, first 1,000 customers, like you can go and find them yourself. I promise, right? If you can't figure out between your friends, your family, cold calling people on LinkedIn or whatever, how to get that, like what's nuts is your first 100 is like, and I'm talking about more on the DTC side. Maybe it's a little bit harder, obviously, on the enterprise side, right? But the reason that's important is because you have to know those people, right? You have to be able to talk to them and find them and figure out, and like you're doing so much psychographic analysis to think about like, where are these people? What are they doing? Why are they thinking this way? Influencers can be helpful. I would say that we historically have not paid influencers, and especially the first few years, it was all about have a product that's compelling enough that influencers will hopefully post for free because we're going to give them the product, or they're going to get access to something they wouldn't have otherwise. And then, one other thing was like a referral program. So we launched this referral program, which at the beginning was very simple, no technology. It just said at checkout, if a friend told you about Casper, put their name here and we'll send you $75. Okay. In like the notes section of the checkout box, because we didn't know how to build the technology for this. Now this ended up being super powerful, because what ended up happening is a bunch of college students who had bought Caspers realized if they get other people to buy, they can make $75 per bed that they sell. So we had one guy pay his entire college tuition. Like I sent him a $25,000 wire one day because he was out there just hustling on campus trying to get other people to buy this stuff and learn about it. And it was totally by accident, right? It's just because we had kind of set things up in this way, and we were very generous about sharing the economics with other people.
That's funny, because the inception, the idea itself also came from what Philip's selling called mattresses in college. So it kind of came full circle with the referral program. It was always there. The idea was always there. Okay, let's move into something a little bit more tactical. How do you mitigate high costs associated with shipping and returns? That's a great question. So just to give you context, Neil, I think that logistics, and particularly reverse logistics, has really improved over the last few years in India, but we still don't have certain sort of return reverse logistics programs like try before you buy, et cetera, et cetera. So we haven't figured out everything, but we are so just to give you context before you answer that.
Yeah. So two things are very important when you think about shipping and logistics. One is figuring out how important is it to your business, and are there other people's logistics you can piggyback on? Because we realized we want to be a product development company, so we didn't want to in-source the logistics at the very beginning. Now what happened is that's the reason why we decided to put it into a box, because we realized all the other mattress companies had to hire their own teams of people. So we just looked at what are the maximum UPS dimensions, like literally like within half an inch. We measured it out, and then we went back and said, now how the heck can I fit it into that thing, right? Like how IKEA does. Now that totally changed the economics for our business, because instead of sending it, with two people in a truck, which costs $150 to deliver it, I could send it via UPS and it costs $30 to deliver it. So now all of a sudden on a $1,000 mattress, I got $120 back right there. and that money I could go back and put into marketing or other things. So one is, and similarly, I think in India, whether you're using, cut a deal with one of these other people, right? Can you piggyback on Flipkart or Amazon or other, some other businesses, logistics? Because on the reverse, on the delivery side, one thing we realized was at that time there were a bunch of these companies doing public storage on demand. So they come to your house, drop off some bins, you can store things, they'll take it away.
Yeah.
And these people have no business except for the first of the month and the middle of the month when people are moving, right? So the rest of the time, their trucks are sitting empty. So we cut a deal with one of the guys in New York and said, why don't we use your service the opposite way? We're going to store our beds in your warehouse, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to use your trucks to drop them off to people on all of these days where your trucks are sitting empty, and you're going to do it really cheap because they're doing nothing else. And so there was a way of kind of reverse cutting it. And the last thing I'll bring up is an example of this business, which is, theoretically thinking about your business model differently. So I invested in this company, Skillmatics, which has been growing like crazy. And what they do is, right, they make things in India because they have a very competitive advantage. They do like games for kids, board games. They're doing kind of other stuff. Amazing founder. And what they're doing now is that they've figured out a way of selling it actually in the United States. So obviously India is a big market for them as well. Now what that does is you get this insane competitive advantage because you're making things and designing things in India where it's very cheap. And then you get this huge gross margin spread because you're selling it on Amazon. And so to the question of the person who asked about organic growth, Amazon can be an amazing tool for organic growth because you don't necessarily have to spend to market there, right? So that's kind of like a cost per acquisition transaction where you can dramatically grow your business very quickly. By thinking about like cross-border or other channel opportunities.
I'm gonna use that to bring up another slightly related question. You guys moved in, you're in a couple of different markets now. For Indian startups specifically, and you're an investor in Skillmatics, so this is very pertinent. What are some of the considerations for people who are thinking about starting a cross-border D2C startup from India or expanding into a new market? You've seen it.
I would pick one market and try to get it to work really well. Like this is an important lesson I learned from Casper, and I can talk to you guys openly about this now. 1 year in, we decided, we want to be kings of the world. And so we decided to launch from US into Europe. And so we opened an office in Berlin, we hired a bunch of people there, and we launched in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, France, UK, like all of these different markets with people in both London and Berlin. And the thing I learned was, it gets really expensive really fast, right? Because if you have a product, especially if your product changes. So the thing I didn't realize at the time was mattresses are highly regulated. So in every single one of those markets, we had to design almost a different product based on the local regulations. Now we had to have all these different SKUs for every single different country. They also have all different languages, right? Whether it's German, French, English. And so it's like, oh my God, now I have to have a website that's in 4 or 5 different languages. People on customer service that speak all of those languages. It was like way too complicated to get this business to work. Whereas the United States, what's amazing, and I think part of the reason why so many companies want to launch in the US is that they almost all speak the same language. Logistics is very easy. Tax and stuff is very easy. So it's not to say that every company should launch in the US, but I wish we had spent a little bit more time really thinking about, how does your product fit into this category, right? Is there a reason why you should win, right? Do you have better margins? Do you have better quality? Is there something that's that you can get that other people can't get? And then try to get it to work in one place first. Because if you get that model to work in one place, then replicating it is much easier than trying to do the same thing in 6 different places at once. And I think we've seen that, right? With some Indian startups now, some of the famous ones even that have tried to go so big and so quickly, and then you see that quality can dramatically diminish, and that comes back to the question of brand. Like, who are you, right? If people can't trust what you're providing them, your brand is worth nothing.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm gonna picked a very easy question for a follow up because I think that was I hammered you with like a few technical ones. What's the story behind the name Casper?
It was our roommate's name, actually. So we had hired a branding agency. They locked us in a room, and we thought of all these stupid names, like we didn't like any of them. And then we had a roommate named Casper with a K, And so we said, oh, that's kind of interesting. Like, why don't we name it Casper? And at the beginning, honestly, I hated the name. I was like, this is the stupidest name. I don't like it. But it grew on me over time. And we decided to change the K to a C. And part of it, now we tripped into this, right? Which was, okay, having somebody's name really powerful, because actually it creates now this persona around the brand, because it's like, oh, Casper, like it might be a person. The person has personality characteristics, right? Like it actually is almost, and I think that's why you've seen, especially in the United States, so many brands pick people's names as like Oscar, Casper, whatever, where you can now build this association around who this person might be.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just sorry. I got distracted. I got another message from one of the organizers about more questions. Okay. I'm going to combine two questions,
Sure.
which are slightly related. One, with mattresses being, expensive and at the same time, not a high frequency purchase. Secondly, in the beginning, actually I'm combining three questions. Secondly, in the beginning, you had only one SKU for a very long time. How did you think about frequency? How did you think about retention? How did you think about repeat orders as you sort of scaled? And then you of course, eventually did introduce more products, but I knew it was a little bit later. I mean, at least I remember it was a little bit later. So I guess
it was like a year in, and at the beginning, it was really just, you have to be, if you're selling one product, you got to figure out how to be first purchase profitable. And actually, that's been one of the best things that we've done as a company, is we didn't get very cute on LTV. We basically said, we have $1,000 on this product, which means I have, $500 in gross margin, net of marketing, I've got whatever amount of money. That's your budget. So we do not exceed that budget on a blended basis. Of course, there are purchases that it's going to be different. Two was, for us, referral and virality around the product was like pseudo LTV, because we realized that if I'm selling one product, the best thing I can do and the most efficient frontier for acquisition is going to be, if I've sold you this bed soap, how do I get you to tell 3 more of your friends about this product so that they buy it from us? And so there was a lot of focus on just like, what else can we do, right? Can I send you a handwritten note? We would send all of our customers holiday cards every year saying, thank you so much for being a customer. We love you, et cetera. And sometimes we didn't even put a coupon code in it, because we just said, you know what, we just want to keep reminding them that you're part of the family. And then thinking about like, what is it? That's, somebody asked a question about our content marketing. A lot of the original content marketing, whether it was the blogs that we launched, Ben Winkle's, that was like it was actually like a news site that was all about things related to food.
Yeah, I remember.
Magazines. It was all around, how can we continue to get engagement, even though you're not going to buy something from us. But the end goal is that eventually we'll have more products that we can sell you, and hopefully you can tell more people about it so that they'll continue to buy mattresses from us.
Slightly related. By the way, I love the idea of not trying to get too cute about your LTV. So you didn't lie to yourself and say.
I mean, it's hard, right? Like, what are we going to say? People are going to buy 1.3 mattresses on average, and so like you can bleed a lot of money very quickly that way. Oh, one last thing I'll say on that point was, also, if you can think about how to architect your supply chain in a way that gets you negative cash conversion, it can be very powerful. So what happened is, in the United States, because we were manufacturing there, we would sell a mattress to you today. I would get the money from Stripe or Braintree 2 days later, right? And what? I wouldn't have to pay our manufacturer for the product, even though they were drop shipping it to you, for 30 to 45 days, which meant that we were floating 45 days of cash almost all the time, which meant that as the business was growing, our balance sheet got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, because we were basically allowed to keep a month or more of cash, which meant that we could keep reinvesting that in marketing. And so again, that was, not necessarily like something that we realized was so powerful early on, but if you can figure out a way to do that in terms of negotiating with your suppliers to get a better economic arrangement, it can mean that you can raise a lot less money or think about how to deploy that into different places much more effectively.
I think that's a great suggestion. So if most manufacturers in India, most suppliers, most vendors, you can figure out, I mean, or smaller companies a bit tougher, but 30 days, 60 days, even 90 days is possible in India as well.
Right. Yeah. Which is crazy to think that okay, if you could increase your run rate on a basis by, 3 months, but every single month add more to it, like that's insane.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great suggestion. R&D, how did you guys manage R&D costs early on?
It helped to have a co-founder who was experienced in this. We look at the beginning. We don't have to. We didn't. Now we have Casper Labs, which is this like insane place where we're doing crazy R&D, and we spent a ton of money building it out. And we have tons of people there. At the beginning, it was me and Jeff in Providence, Rhode Island, because he was a professor working at both Brown and RISD and stuff. And we opened up this like rinky-dink little office, and we just build stuff ourselves. We would get slabs of foam, we'd glue it together ourselves. There are lots of things that you can do yourself, which maybe in the technical way is not as great as what you would want. But at the beginning, when your list of ideas is this big, you're just trying to hone in from like 100% to 10%, right? And most of that you can do without very sophisticated equipment. It's the last bit. Like today, now we're optimizing for the last 3%, the last 5% in terms of how to make it better, which requires a lot more equipment. The other thing is, just beg people to do this stuff for free for you. Like our manufacturers was so hard to find somebody who wanted to work with us, but once we found the person, we got them to do a lot of free work for us in terms of research and development, product stuff, because we convinced them if we're successful, you're going to be successful. And we didn't pay for a lot of that stuff out of pocket. And so then you can defer some of these costs into the future by having a partner who can do something for you.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, that manufacturer stuck around for a very long time and has become very successful now.
Right? Very successful.
All right, I think we have 2 minutes. I'm going to ask you one question. There are a lot of other questions from the audience. Unfortunately, what's the best way to reach you if anyone wants to follow up and ask questions?
Yeah, you can hit me up on Twitter. I'm just at Neil Parikh.
All right, super. Last question, completely unrelated, but I think important considering where we're at in the world, how we're all working from home, all trying to start companies, deal with stuff. How do you relax? I know that sleep is something which is very important to you. I actually know that this is important to you, but how do you think about your own personal wellness? How do you relax? How do you de-stress?
Yeah. Man, at the beginning, I was so bad at this. I was continuously just, when you're on the startup train, it's cool to sleep 3 hours, as little as possible, whatever, to work. Over time, I've just gotten better at like multimodal. So, meditation has become a big part of my life. And I'm the type of person where I don't do it every day. I, in fact, probably there are times where I'll do it for a week, and there are times where I'll stop doing it for a long time. And so, I've come to realize that I just have to be less hard on myself. Like there are going to be times where I'm doing amazingly great, and then I fall off a cliff, right? Because I've gone out with some friends one night or something has happened where you like totally, change your rhythm and your workload and whatnot. And so, and then I would also think about your mental health and really take care of that. Like it's one of the most important things that you can really be thinking about is, whether that's finding help or finding friends to talk to, or just making sure that you are able to vent about the things that are going on and not internalize all of this. Because when you're a founder, so much of this is your entire life. But then once you step away from it, you realize like in the grand scheme of things, your own health is what's the most important thing, right? And so you have to find a way to separate those things and make sure that like if you need help on whatever front, right, whether that's the way you eat, your mental health, whatever, that you're going to get that, because your company is going to be better off if you're in a better mental state and you're a better leader.
Thank you for, I really appreciate the honesty with that question, because I think there's always very, very successful founders always like to maintain an image that they're constantly on and they're robots, but it's nice to, much like Casper, understand that there are humans behind Casper who actually run the company as well. So, in fact, I realized that I was looking at the wrong clock. We have 2 minutes for one more question that I'm going to sneak in.
Sure.
Oh, this is a fun one. I'm combining two. So, you're an angel investor as well, and you've invested in a few D2C brands. How do you think about what do you look for when you what is exciting for you? What's interesting in a D2C brand today for Neil Parikh?
I think the business has to be doing something different, and this sounds like a very easy thing, right? But there was this era where everybody was going down the pharmacy aisle and saying, "I'm making a direct-to-consumer version of this," right? Whether it's direct to consumer soda water or whatever it might be. And that worked for a while, because before it was, how do I disrupt Procter & Gamble or the big, CPG brands? At this point, it's not very efficient to do that anymore because there's just too many brands out there. So I think in the future, the question is going to be, what unique competitive advantage that you have that makes your business work better than other businesses, right? Because it's too, like, you could go online and I bet by the end of the day we could launch a direct to consumer brand. So I think it's the founders, right? Do you have the tenacity to make sure that you can get through anything? Like Paul Graham from YC talks about that, like cockroach mentality around, like, you really have to hustle. This is a business where every day of it for years is going to be really difficult. Even when things are great, you might not have enough product and people are mad at you. And when things are not going well, you're going to have to hustle to try to sell stuff. So I think it's a question of, do you really have the tenacity to get through it? And then for me, the last important thing is, like, why are you doing it, right? Like, I want to back people, and I'm interested in backing people that have some sort of a greater mission and vision for the world. And, and because the thing I realized from Casper is, when you have that and you care about something that's more than just profits and money, the money will flow through the system. That's easy, right? Because you're not necessarily chasing that. But you have something that's higher that you can use to motivate your team, that is a platform for you to go and talk to people about. And it naturally becomes much easier to build a business around something that stands for more than just, the pursuit of profit.
Amazing. Well, we could go on for hours, man. And maybe we should do another one of these a little bit more casually. But first of all, thank you so much. I think I shared this with a few friends and the organizers, Rahul and everyone else, that I've been trying to get you to do something like this in India for like literally the last 5-6 years. And all it took was a pandemic and you being stationary in one room in New York for this to be possible. So thank you. Thank you for taking out the time. We'll try to get you back here in some way or form to do more of these.
I'm honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Neil. Thanks so much for this. Thank you for coming on. Sohaib, you were great as well. I think what everyone's loving is how candid you guys were on this. So thank you so much for the honesty. And I think everyone has a lot more questions for you guys, Neil. So I'm going to just ask them to hit you up on Twitter. Sohaib, is there another way to reach you as well?
Twitter.
Twitter? Yeah. Okay.
Twitter works, yeah. Twitter's great.
Thanks. So everyone that's watching, we have 7 more sessions just like this one lined up for you tomorrow. So come back and join us right here. And if you are on Emmy, join us on the networking lounge right after this. We can unwind and talk a little bit more about what's coming tomorrow. Bye. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Asta. Thanks, team.
Bye, Asta.